One of the most memorable and spectacular events of World War II was D-Day, the Allied operation aimed at defeating the Germans, thus liberating Northwest Europe. As a channel dedicated to history, it would be a big mistake not to pay special attention to this year's 80th commemoration of D-Day. The invasion of Nazi-occupied France was codenamed Operation Overlord and took place on Tuesday the 6th of June 1944. Originally it was planned for the 5th of June, but was delayed because of poor weather. A severe storm battered the Normandy coast, making the German commander in charge of defending the North French coast, Marshal Erwin Rommel, believed that an attack would be highly unlikely. He even went back home to Herrlingen in Germany for his wife's birthday. The Allied forces launched a combined naval, air and land assault in what was to become the largest seaborne invasion in history. In effect, it opened a second front to attack the Germans, the first front being the Russian front. The aim was to weaken the Germans by forcing them to divide their defences over two fronts. One may wonder why Normandy was chosen to land the troops. The French resistance had indicated that there were fewer defences in Normandy than the Atlantic Wall region surrounding Calais. The Normandy region had many bunkers containing antiquated firepower from the First World War. Choosing the route with the longest distance from the UK should also give the Allies an element of surprise. It was assumed that the Germans would be anticipating an attack via the shortest route, far more east. Maps had also shown that there were good roads to get landing troops off the Normandy beach area and inland on the long road to the liberation of Europe. Preparations for the invasion already started about a year earlier in 1943. Supreme Allied Commander American General Dwight D. Eisenhower led the planning team. Many exercises were held by means of simulated landings under attack. Factories were transformed into war production facilities as the country changed to a war economy. Large-scale preparations were undertaken to construct the necessary numbers of ships, amphibious landing craft, tanks and aircraft. Stocks were expanded and old ships adapted. By December 1943 the plan was set. At the Tehran conference, involving the leaders of the Allied powers, US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, the plan was approved. In the last months of 1943 and the first months of 1944, thousands of American and Canadian soldiers crossed the Atlantic to participate in the greatest world conflict of the 20th century.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures.
In the months leading up to the invasion, the Allies conducted a substantial military deception, codenamed Operation Bodyguard, to mislead the Germans as to the date and location of the main Allied landings. In the weeks preceding D-Day, there were massive troop transports in the UK towards the south coast. Roads were closed off and locals must have been aware that the preparations of the invasion were on its way. As early as May the 26th, the British Canadian forces were redirected from the assembly areas to 19 embarkation points. The Americans followed 4 days later on the 30th of May. Many troops were unaware that this was the real thing. For all they knew, it might have been another training exercise. They waited for days on end until it dawned on them that the operation was about to begin, when announcements were made that this might be a good time to take the first seasickness pills. Moments later, the briefings commenced, explaining in detail to the troops what ordeal and challenges they were about to face. The first thing that sprang to mind to everybody involved was, will I come back alive? And if not, what will happen to my family?
Teamwork wins wars. I mean teamwork among nations, services, and men.
The invasion began shortly after midnight on the morning of June the 6th, with extensive aerial and naval bombardments. It also involved an airborne assault with the landing of 24,000 American, British and Canadian airborne troops.
Get ready to jump!
The Normandy area of attack stretched over a length of 80 kilometers and was divided in 5 zones named Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword. Troops were transported by all kinds of naval vessels from ports all along the British south coast, as far away as from Falmouth in the west, Dartmouth, Weymouth, Poole, New Forest beaches like Leap Beach, Portsmouth and Shoreham, as well as various further away ports from the east coast. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels, including battleships, destroyers, minesweepers, escorts and assault craft took part. Utah and Omaha were assigned to the American 1st Army, respectively the 1st and 4th Infantry Division under the command of U.S. General Omar Bradley, deploying 73,000 troops. Gold and Sword were assigned to the British 2nd Army, respectively the 50th and 3rd Infantry Division, commanded by General Miles Dempsey, consisting of 62,000 troops. The beach in between Gold and Sword, Juno Beach, was attacked by the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division, deploying 21,000 troops. The Americans, British and Canadians formed the core of the troops, but it should not be forgotten that also Australian, Belgian, Czech, Dutch, French, Greek, New Zealand, Norwegian, Rhodesian and Polish participated in naval, air and ground support. In total, 2 million men were made available for the invasion. 156,000 men participated in the first attack wave. No women were part of these divisions, but they did play an important supporting role in the background in the Women's Royal Naval Service. They were involved in logistical and secretarial support, wireless telegraphy, radar operation and code breaking. There was just one woman, a war correspondent on the beaches at Normandy that day. The men had to transfer from the ships into the landing craft, climbing down nets. You should try to imagine what it was like to be involved in such a daring operation. Following the storms of the previous day, the seas were still very rough for the crossing towards north of France. If seasickness had not yet occurred during the crossing, it was a matter of catching up during the last leg of their journey. Once the doors of the landing craft opened, the battle for survival commenced. The terror and the fear that they suffered must have been immense. The men landed under heavy fire from gun emplacements overlooking the beaches, and the shore was mined and covered with obstacles such as wooden stakes, metal tripods and barbed wire, making the work of the beach clearing teams difficult and extremely dangerous. Due to a navigation error, the American troops landed more than 1 kilometer south of their target at Utah Beach. Conditions there were favorable as they landed at lightly defended sandy beaches and low dunes. After being informed of this situation, American President Roosevelt simply said, "We'll start the war from here." Casualties were heaviest at Omaha with its high cliffs. American rangers had great difficulty to capture the German battery on a 100-meter high cliff at Point du Hoc. Allied intelligence got the situation at Omaha Beach wrong, as they anticipated light resistance. Instead, the landing troops met severe defenses by the elite German 352nd Infantry Division, who were ready and waiting at the cliff top overlooking the beach. Minutes after the first landings, nearly all officers and petty officers were killed, leaving the troops leaderless and thus in chaos. On D-Day, the American 1st Division suffered 2,400 fatal casualties and a similar number of wounded and missing, the highest losses in the entire operation. At Gold, Juno and Sword, several fortified towns were cleared in house-to-house fighting, and 2 major gun emplacements at Gold were disabled using specialized tanks. The British at Gold encountered less resistance, and the 50th Division managed to break through the German defenses, in particular by the deployment of tanks. There were only about 400 casualties. The Canadian landings at Juno Beach are probably the best known because of the stunning film footage made by Sergeant Bill Grant of the Canadian Army Film and Photo Unit. Here's that footage in splendid color. The house seen through the opened landing craft doors is still there at Bernières-sur-Mer. Other great footage shows captured German soldiers at the local railway station at Bernières-sur-Mer. German resistance on the fifth most easterly beach, Sword, was light, and within less than an hour the British Second Army managed to break through the defences. Shortly after, these troops managed to join up with the paratroopers who had captured the strategically important Pegasus Bridge south of Sword. The Allies were assisted by the French resistance. Their main role was sabotage. The evening before D-Day they had been alerted via a coded message on Radio London.
Ici Londres.
It were the first two lines from the Chanson d'automne poem by Paul Verlaine.
Veuillez écouter tout d'abord quelques messages personnels. Les sanglots longs des violons de l'automne. Je répète, les sanglots longs des violons de l'automne blessent mon cœur d'une langueur monotone. Je répète, blesse mon cœur d'une langueur monotone.
The second line indicated that D-Day was imminent within the next 24 hours. The Allies failed to achieve any of their major goals beyond the establishment of the beachheads on the first day. Carentan, Saint-Lô and Bayeux remained in German hands, and the important city of Caen, just south of the landing beaches, was not captured until the 21st of July. Only Juno and Gold beaches were linked on the first day. It took until the 12th of June before all 5 beachheads were connected. However, the operation did gain a foothold, which the Allies gradually managed to expand over the coming months. At least 10,000 Allied casualties on D-Day were recorded, with over 4,400 confirmed dead. German casualties on D-Day have been estimated at 4,000 to 9,000 men. Due to the earlier Allied deception campaigns, the Germans for weeks continued to assume that there was going to be a second invasion in the English Channel. For that reason they did not move all their troops to Normandy, a very important mistake. There are 3 important activities that played a vital role in the success of D-Day, namely the use of glider planes to transport large numbers of troops, the provisional Mulberry harbours, and Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean, to provide essential fuel supply to the Allied military vehicles. The gliders are addressed in a separate video, which I released recently. Just to sum up, that approximately 15,000 men were transported in crude, flimsy, wooden, engineless planes, namely the American Waco CG-4A, the British Airspeed Horsa and the General Aircraft Hamilcar, towed by a variety of aircraft, in particular the Douglas C-47, the military version of the DC-3 Dakota. In view of the fact that all French harbours were still in enemy hands, a genius plan was worked out under the codename Mulberry to construct floating harbours that were connected by kilometre-long floating beachheads with the mainland. Each beachhead consisted of an array of floating pontoons connected by bridge elements, so-called whales. Till this day the remnants of the floating harbours can still be seen at Arromanches. These Mulberry harbours fulfilled a crucial role in landing tanks, trucks, jeeps and other vehicles, awaiting the liberation of nearby Cherbourg harbour. The third remarkable element of D-Day was Operation Pluto, short for Pipeline Under the Ocean. The Allies realized that sufficient fuel supplies for ships and vehicles would be a critical issue, knowing that supply ships were vulnerable to attack. Tens of kilometers of fuel pipes were produced, consisting of bendable 3-inch pipes. These pipes consisted of a lead core, steel wire reinforcement and a tar outer coating. The first pipeline, nicknamed Bambi, ran from Sandown on the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg. The second 45-kilometer long pipeline, nicknamed Dumbo, ran from Dungeness on the Kent coast to Boulogne. Other pipeline routes followed soon. In total 12 became operational. 6 huge floating drums were developed to lay the pipes. These drums were assigned with the designation HMS Conundrum 1-6. Each drum could hold 140 kilometers of pipe. Pumping stations at Dungeness were disguised as holiday camp buildings. So far, part 1 of our documentary about D-Day. In part 2, we will address the military advances of the Allied troops towards Paris in the Battle of Normandy.